David took supplies to his brothers in Saul's army and to their captain over them. And while he was there, he heard Goliath's challenge for Israel to send out a man to fight with him. And the challenge was that if Israel's warrior defeated Goliath, then the Philistines would serve Israel. But if Goliath was able to defeat Israel's champion, then Israel would be in servitude to the Philistines. It made David angry when he heard this. Look at chapter 17 and verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God." David said, "Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor and essayed to go, but he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them." And David put them off. And he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. And the Philistine came on, drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. The word ruddy there is basically the same Hebrew word for the word Edom, means red. Some think that means David had red hair, but I think it meant that David had been out keeping sheep in the sun and was of red complexion. The Philistine said unto David, "Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field." Then said David to the Philistine, "Thou comest to me with a sword and a spear and a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and with spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." It came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. And there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath therewith, and slew him and cut off his head therewith. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until they come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And they wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Sharim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistines and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son this stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said unto him, Whose son art thou, young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Now we saw that Jesse had 8 sons, and David was the least. And he was busy keeping the sheep when Samuel came to anoint the new king over Israel. And so he had to look at all the 7 sons that were bigger and older. And God said, don't look on them from the human point of view, for I don't judge as man judges. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. And so he said, Is there not another son? And he said, I have one more who's keeping the sheep. And he said, Bring him. As soon as he saw him, God spoke to Samuel and said, This is him. Anoint him king. So David has come now and volunteers to fight against Goliath. His brothers and the king try to talk him out of it. I imagine that they would have certain fear that if David was killed, then they would be in submission to the Philistines. But David was confident, and confident enough to talk to the king about his experience, and so the king let him go. He had experienced deliverance from a lion and a bear. He knew also that he was a marksman with a sling. I've read that a sling could throw a rock from 1/4 pound to 1/2 pound, the distance of 50 meters accurately, almost like a rifle bullet, from 45 to 75 miles an hour. When they swing that thing around their head and they turn that one strap loose, it would send that thing sailing. And David put on Saul's armor, but he couldn't wear it. It was too big for him, for one thing. Saul was head and shoulders taller than all of Israel. It looks like he should have been the one to go out and fight the giant. But David was unable to wear it, and so he wanted to go with the way he was accustomed to fighting. And God enabled David. I wonder, have you faced a giant in your life? Something that was so big and so awesome against you that you didn't know how you were going to get through that situation. But somehow, God delivered you. In our Christian walk, we're to be like David and Joshua. We're not to fear. We're to be courageous. We're to be strong in the faith, believing God when we ask of Him and tell Him our problem and believe He will help us. The battle is the Lord's. And David understood the giant had blasphemed God, blasphemed the army of God, and David was fighting for God's glory and fighting in the name of the God of Israel. The giant was, according to the statistics mentioned, 9 foot 9 inches tall. He carried a spear that weighed 15 pounds. He wore a coat of mail that the average person would not even be able to lift, let alone to wear. And his giant size and all the battles he had won previously, he was very cocky and arrogant about being able to fight. But David knew his God was superior to this giant and superior to the giant's gods. David knew that God had delivered Moses and Joshua from Egypt and all of Israel, that God had parted the Red Sea, that they'd gone through on dry ground. He knew all these stories about what God had done, and he'd seen God work in response to his own prayers to deliver him. He communed with God, and he'd also already been anointed by Samuel to be king, and he'd been hired by Saul to play his harp because God had sent an evil spirit upon Saul. And when this evil spirit began to antagonize Saul, David could play the harp and soothe him. But yet, Saul didn't remember who this young man was and who his father was. Part of the agreement was that he would give him his daughter to marry, he would give him wealth, and he would take his father's land off the tax roll. And so this was all a part of the agreement for the man that would fight against Goliath. But David fought for the name of the Lord. He didn't seek the reward, even though he won the victory. He understood it was God's victory. He knew God had delivered him. Goliath mocked David and his weapons, and David said, I come to thee in the name of the God of Israel. Let's look at Psalm 18, what David wrote in Psalm 18. Verse 32. Psalm 18, verse 32. Let me read verse 31. For who is God save the Lord, or who is a rock save our God? It is God that girdeth me with strength and maketh my way perfect. He maketh my feet like hinds' feet. Hinds are like deer or mountain goats. And setteth me upon my high places. He teacheth my hands to war, so that a bow of steel is broken by mine arms. David understood that it was God that gave him the victories in battle and caused circumstances to work in his favor. David kills the giant and takes off his head using the giant's own sword. But David made no demands for the reward. The Philistines did not keep their promise. The challenge, they fled when their giant went down. Look at chapter 17, verse 51. David ran, stood upon the Philistine, killed him, okay. Verse 52, the men of Israel and of Judah rose, shouted, pursued the Philistines until they came to the valley of Ekron. So they pursued them, and they killed them. And then they finally got tired of the slaughter, and they turned around and went back home. And the Philistines fled to their own place. In chapter 18, David becomes best friends with Jonathan, Saul's son. It came to pass he made an end of speaking unto Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him go home anymore to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of his robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword and his bow and his girdle. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war. And he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. It came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. It came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even unto the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him and had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. And Saul said to David, Behold my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. And David said unto Saul, Who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel, the Maholathite, to wife. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and the hand of the Philistines may be against him, wherever Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. And Saul commanded his servant, saying, Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servant spake those words in David's ears, in the ears of David. And David said, Seemeth it to you a light thing to be the king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, On this manner spake David. And Saul said, Thus shall ye say to David, The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David the words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth. It came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. Now this plan that Saul has cooked up to try to kill David at the hands of the Philistines. He wants David dead. And David knew that Saul hated him. And he goes after the Philistines. He takes his men with him, and they kill 200 instead of 100. Now we come to chapter 19. Saul is still angry and wants David dead. He sees that David will be king. Chapter 19, verse 1. Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all of his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art. And I will commune with my father and see that I will tell thee. Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee were very good. For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Therefore, when wilt thou sin against the innocent blood to slay David without a cause? And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, and he sat in his house with a javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So Saul is he's going against his word and going back, still trying to kill David. Saul is angry. He wants David dead. He sees that Jonathan, his son, and Michal, his daughter, are protecting David from him. And verse 11 and 12, Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow shall be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He's sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed, that I might slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me, and sent away mine enemy, that he has escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said unto me, Let me go, why should I kill thee? So David fled and escaped and came to Samuel in Ramah. Now Samuel is the prophet of God. And David comes and tells him all that Saul has been trying to do. And the soldiers come after him there, and Samuel and the prophets are there prophesying. And when the soldiers come after him, they begin to prophesy. The Spirit of God comes upon them. And so he sends more, and the Spirit of God comes upon them. Then verse 24, Saul comes and strips off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all the day and all that night, wherefore they say, Is Saul also among the prophets? So the Spirit of God came upon him. The evil spirit was causing him trouble, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied unto the Lord. Now we're in chapter 20. David flees to Naioth in Ramah and came before Jonathan, his beloved friend. And David said to him, There is but a step between me and death. Your father wants to kill me. And Jonathan devises a plan. He says, I will go out into the field with my bow and arrows, and I will fire 3 arrows in the distance, and you be hidden behind the rock. And he said, I'll send a lad to fetch the arrows. And if I tell the lad the arrows are back this way, then you'll know that your life is in danger. He said, but if I tell him to go on and get the arrows on over, he said, then you'll know my father wants to kill you so you can flee. And so David comes back and meets with Jonathan, and they kiss each other, and they express a covenant. And Jonathan just asked David, promise me that when you become the king, and his intention is, I will become second in command to you, but do not kill my family and Saul's family. And David will be in exile. David goes in chapter 21 to Ahimelech, the priest, to seek bread because he's in exile. He's fleeing for his life. He's got a few men with him. He asked the priest for bread, and he said, I have no common bread. All I've got is the showbread of the tabernacle. And he said, if the young men have kept themselves from women, then I'll give you 5 loaves of the showbread. And so they said, we have not been with women. He said, I also need a weapon. And they said, the only weapon here is the sword of Goliath that you killed and that is here. And so he gave him that. And when the priests communed with David, he didn't know all these things that were going on from Saul. And so Saul pursues, and there is an evil Edomite who is there and hears David and Ahimelech the priest. And he tells Saul of what took place. So Saul tells his servants to go and slay all the priests in linen. and they won't do it. They stood up to him. But Doeg, this Edomite, he volunteered to do it. And he killed 85 of the priests and their family. And David went and hid in the cave of Adullam. Between 7 and 10 years, David ran from Saul rather than having battle with him or killing him, because he considered Saul was put in as king as the Lord's anointed, and he would not slay him. And during that time, 400 disgruntled men in the kingdom aligned themselves with David. And so he has an army to fight the Philistines and to make their way. And we'll take up where that takes up next week, Lord willing. Thank you for being here. Hope this is interesting to you. It is an amazing story. David was a mighty man of war from his youth. It's estimated he was probably 17 to 18 years of age when he fought Goliath. And now he's over 1,000 soldiers under the king's army and going out regularly. And then he eventually becomes over all of the men of war. But Saul has that evil spirit that comes upon him, and he wants to kill David. He's jealous. He doesn't like the prestige that David has from the people. But David, we find nowhere that he sought that of the people. David was kind and friendly and had a good heart, and he behaved himself wisely doing the king's work. But the king wanted him killed. You see, you can't make peace with the devil. He wants to destroy us. He's like a roaring lion going about seeking whom he may devour. Let us be wise in the battle. Father, thank you for the message tonight. Thank you for the faithfulness of your people. Bless them, I pray. Give them safety in going home. And help us all to learn from these lessons to be strong in the faith, to believe you, and when we face great obstacles, to not fear, to be courageous, to have faith, and to pray and ask you to intervene and believe that you will. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.